IVM.
Hello, we're Team Splainer. Welcome to an all-new episode of Press Decode, a weekly podcast where we take Splainer's mission to declutter the news one step further. Check out our newsletter for more stories and follow us at SplainerIn to keep up with all the fun things we plan for our Splainer fam. So sit back, relax, and don't let the news give you the blues. I'm Vagda, your host for the day, and I have with me Sara and Prafula. As always, we have 3 segments for you. In our big story, we're taking a look at Russia's alleged war crimes in Bucha. For the Food for Thought segment, we're talking about women's cricket in India. And in our final segment, we'll be roasting and toasting our fave and least fave items. Okay, now on to our big story for the week. Just giving you a trigger warning, this segment has some graphic descriptions of violence. So Russia retreated from the northern areas of Ukraine over the last weekend. After being rather unsuccessful in its attempt to take over Kyiv, they're now planning to concentrate on the eastern areas of Ukraine, of the Donbas, which includes regions controlled by Russian-backed separatists. Now, as Russian forces withdrew from the north, Ukraine found evidence of gross torture done to civilians in the region. They found bodies of more than 400 civilians. The most appalling accounts come from Bucha, which is a city near Kyiv. Ukrainian officials said that the scenes there looked like those from a horror movie. Visuals from Bucha show civilians lying dead in streets, many face down with their hands tied at the back, some shot at close range, some shot in the mouth, in the head. Others have their legs tied. Mass graves have been found. Satellite photos show a 45-foot-long trench in the grounds of a church in Bucha. In another town, the Associated Press reported how Russian troops killed the town's mayor, her husband, her son, and threw their bodies into a pit. The mayor's husband had his hands behind his back and a piece of plastic wrapped around his eyes like a blindfold. That's not all. Ukrainian officials also alleged that Russian soldiers in the area raped women and buried their bodies. The Human Rights Watch also confirmed incidents of rape too. Ukrainian President Zelensky described the Russian forces as murderers, torturers, and rapists who were committing genocide in the country. Russia has obviously denied it had any role to play in the killing of civilians, claiming that they were placed after Russian forces left to give Russia a bad name. But a New York Times investigation of satellite images shows that the bodies in Bucha had been lying in the street for weeks. The US and many European countries have called Putin personally a war criminal and have newly called for investigation into war crimes committed by Russian forces in Ukraine. But before we get into how these demands may be met, can we first get one major confusion out of the way? And that is, what are war crimes? You're literally at war with guns and tanks and missiles. And yet there are some things you just cannot do. So what's that?
Before we get into war crimes, we need to take a step back and look at what the rules of war are. Because war is brutal and wasteful and, like the song says, good for nothing. And yet there is a line we are willing to draw in the sand. Formerly known as the International Humanitarian Law, these rules aim to maintain some humanity in armed conflicts, saving lives and reducing suffering. These are part of the Geneva Convention, which was first instated in the 19th century. And while the convention has been amended over and over the years, the first one primarily focused on requiring warring armies to take care of the sick and wounded on the battlefield instead of leaving them to die or finishing them off, regardless of which side of the war they were on. And since then, it's been ratified by 196 states. And in addition to caring for the sick and wounded, the rules of war also state that civilians should never be harmed. Prisoners of war should be treated with dignity and not be tortured, and also restricts the kind of weapons that each side can use. For example, dumb bombs, chemical and bioweapons, nerve agents, even some sophisticated weaponry in today's day needs to be aligned with these rules, because these weapons cannot tell the difference between who is a civilian and who is a military person. And if you violate these rules, that is when you are committing a war crime. The International Criminal Court has a specific definition for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression, respectively. So is what Russia doing a war crime?
So, as you've said, right, one of the
Yeah.
fundamental principles of the laws of war is that civilians should not be targeted, purposely at least.
Hmm.
And the fact that there have been attacks on schools and a maternity ward in Kiev and a theater in Mariupol qualify as violations to those laws. And to make matters more dire, we have the case of Bucha, as Vagda described. So, these are clearly atrocities under international humanitarian law. So, yeah.
So technically, yes, these are war crimes, but it's also where the gray area starts, right? Either a national government or the UN Security Council can ask the court to investigate certain cases. Pertaining to this invasion, 39 national governments have moved the court to investigate Russia's crimes right now.
I mean, yeah, sure, moving the court is one step, but what is the system of redressal and how likely is it that someone like Putin can be held responsible? Okay, so I'm going to try and break this up and deal with three main institutions that even have the slightest chance of taking action. To begin with, in 2002, the Rome Statute gave birth to something called the International Criminal Court, or ICC, which you'd mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It is located in The Hague and operates independently. It's the permanent modern successor to the Nuremberg, which prosecuted key Nazi leaders in 1945. 123 countries of the world are party to this treaty of the ICC, but a whopping 42 are not. And this includes notable exceptions like Russia, the US, India, and even Ukraine.
And what's interesting is that Russia, like the US, is not a signatory to the treaty that it was part of creating, for the court, I mean. But it is not a member in the sense that it signed the treaty when the court was created, but it is now not a member. It pulled its membership out in 2016 because this was the same year when the court published an unfavorable verdict about its actions around Crimea, and also began an investigation into its actions because it's backed separatists in Georgia in 2008.
Wow, that makes
Of course
sense.
it did. Of course it did. I mean, the futility of international organizations is an entire podcast on its own. But here's holding out some hope. Interestingly, though, I did not know this. The ICC tries people, not countries, and focuses on those who hold the most responsibilities. So leaders and officials that they can particularly pin the blame on. Now, the ICC has said it does see evidence of war crime and it will conduct trials of war crimes in Ukraine right from 2013 to the present. This is because, like you mentioned, Russia first entered Crimea, which has been part of Ukraine, in 2014. Now, this new referral seems to put all potential war crimes together, but this is still the infant stages of an investigation, if at all. And while this is a criminal code that deals with individuals, it is highly unlikely that anybody would actually arrest and transfer Putin to The Hague for trial. I mean, they can't do it. They can't extricate him from Russia. But even if he were to travel, I don't see this happening. Next, the second organization is the ICJ, or the International Court of Justice, which is also at The Hague and is actually the highest UN court. However, it deals with countries, not individuals, unlike the ICC. But more importantly, its decisions are actually implementable, unlike, again, the ICC. But they're implemented by the UN Security Council, of which Russia is a permanent member and thus holds a critical veto power, allowing it to essentially overturn any decision that's not in its favor. So with the ICC, they could exit. Here, they can veto. The last is the European Court of Human Rights. And actually, a lot of the articles that I read pinned most of their hope on European courts as opposed to entire international courts. But here as well, this is an international court that was created by the Council of Europe and handles cases against both individuals and groups as well as countries. But the problem here, for one, is that Russia has a track record of only spotty compliance. And to add to it, in mid-March, Russia was expelled from the Council of Europe itself. So there goes that. Legal experts also contend that an international treaty or the United Nations, because, the first three options don't seem extremely likely, could possibly create a separate tribunal only to investigate the Russian invasion, as was the case of Yugoslavia and Rwanda. So I guess that could happen.
And, now that that's out of the way, let's look at how the court prosecutes these so-called war crimes, right? If at all, that is. As is with any investigation, there is a burden of proof and due process that is supposed to be followed and played out. So the court will look at satellite images and listen to witness testimonies, etc. And it is going to be a long process. It's going to take years. Leaders have been prosecuted before, because Liberian president Charles Taylor is, I think, the only person who actually has been sentenced. He was sentenced to 50 years. Others who were charged, like Yugoslav leader Slobodan Milosevic and Libyan leader Gaddafi, died during and before their trials, respectively. So international law is arduous and long drawn, but the burning question is, will Putin ever be charged or ever be put on trial?
I suppose we just wait and watch.
I think that's the more hopeful note to end on, because I was going to say something totally not hopeful. So on that note, we come to the end of our first segment. We'll be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network.
Ladies, I'm sure you will relate to it if I say that we are constantly busy with work, studies, cooking, and what not. And amidst all of this, we often forget an important element that needs our desperate attention: finance. So here we are, bringing to you SBI Life presents A Sip of Finance, a women-exclusive podcast where we will teach you how to manage personal finances in a simple and straightforward way with your host, Priyanka Acharya, a finance expert who's been in the industry for 14 plus years. And not just in English, but in 7 more languages. So tune in every Tuesday for fresh episodes on the IBM Podcast Network and all major podcast streaming platforms.
Hello and welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network. We're Team Splainer, and in today's Food for Thought, we're heading to the cricketing world. As you might have heard, the BCCI has expressed its intention to launch an Indian Premier League tournament for women. The first tournament is likely to be held as early as in 2023. That's like now. Now, it'll have about 6 teams in its inaugural season, and the men's teams are likely to be given the first right of refusal to purchase these teams. And about 4 of them are interested. So, yay. It's not the first Premier League in the women's cricket. Australia already has the very, very popular Women's Big Bash League, which has 8 teams and who play 59 matches. New Zealand has the Super Smash Women, and England has the Kia Super League, where Indian players have also played, Smriti Mandana and Harmanpreet Kaur. Pakistan's also launching a similar league next year.
I just want to say, we need to call it the Big Bash League or Super Smash Women. It can't be Women's IPL. I will personally be hurt if it's not called something as cool as that.
Why don't you send some options to BCCI?
I have until 2023. Correct. This is what I'm going to do now.
Yes. Okay, cool. Now, experts agree widely that India is largely an untapped market for women's cricket. And now I can see why. Because there are literally not enough matches that they play. Between 2006 and 2016, the number of one-day international matches played by Indian women was just 95. That is 32% of the matches played by men. Men played 300 matches. And that's not even the half of it.
Thanks for doing the math.
Now, we have obviously a ridiculous wage gap. When I say ridiculous, I mean ridiculous. And I would have never guessed this, but senior women players are paid the salary of an under 19 male player. What the hell? The highest category pay slab for women, that is category A player, is 50 lakh rupees. And that is half of what the lowest category in men gets paid. The highest category for men, category A+, gets paid 7 crore rupees.
Which is the category that does not exist for women, by the way.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
It's like, there are no A+ players, thank you.
But you know what makes even less sense? The fact that all of this happens when both men and women are overseen by the same BCCI. Until 2006, women's cricket was overseen by a fully independent Women's Cricket Association of India. And you would expect, they didn't have money, or they didn't have source, or they didn't have, resources. Now, they're literally with the BCCI. What is the point of getting absorbed into BCCI if you're going to get this? Half of what the lowest category player in men's team gets.
So despite Vagda's shock, my cynical self is actually prepared for most of this.
One knows you're how old are you? You're 40.
22.
That's what you are.
Thank you. But limited opportunities, insane wage gaps. As a woman, we know these things to be far too real. But somehow while researching for this story, two particular things stood out to me, and they were the real kickers. They were even beyond, that's what actually shocked me. So I don't know what your takes are. One was pointed out by Vinayak Mohan Rangan in The Scroll, where he notes the painfully obvious exclusion of the women's team on social media. On the one hand, every men's team match and achievement is marked by a flood of tweets and posts and the official hand, and politicians, everybody is celebrating. On the other hand, the official handle barely even acknowledges international matches played by the women, let alone celebrate them. And there is just one media manager for the team, unlike other countries which have an entire in-house team. Social media is literally the cheapest way to show support, and even that the BCCI falters on. And that was a real shocker to me. I mean, see, it goes beyond just being a petty thing to get stuck on for me. It's reflective of the larger stepchild treatment meted out to the women's team. And I was also interested to know that there was very real consequences. I quote, "A good social media presence is important for the board to promote the sport, for players to reach fans and potential sponsors, and for sponsors who attach themselves to women's sport, which offers fast-growing commercial opportunities world over." So, and with less of a push than the BCCI can then use the cyclic argument of, hey, but no one watches women playing cricket, no one supports it, no one puts money in it, while they themselves are not asked to even showcase the women's team on social media. The second kicker goes beyond the awful stat that Vagda pointed out, the one about the number of international fixtures for women, which is about 32%, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. The pandemic just made all the difference all the more glaring. In 2020, while the board worked overtime to stage the IPL and push through for the men's tour of Australia, it pulled the women's series in England without a second thought. And this is despite the English board promising to arrange proper COVID protocols, etc. It did something similar in Sri Lanka, where they had a problem with quarantine requirements. And they promised a lot, but never actually materialized any series against West Indies and South Africa. So eventually, when the women's team was up for the World Cup, it was after a long period of absolutely no international cricket experience. A former player of the team explains precisely why this is a problem. If the girls are not playing, they will tend to lose form and momentum. It's not easy to just walk out and perform. I mean, I think so too.
Yeah.
Eventually, when Australia, New Zealand, England, and West Indies were back on the field, India crashed out after losing 4 out of 7 matches and didn't even make it to the semi-finals, which was once again used to fuel the, hey, not enough players in the country meet international standards, so why should we expend resources? See, the timing isn't the same, but I think the irony was that in the peak of the second wave, the BCCI pushed really hard for the disastrous IPL, which had to be cut short considering it was being played in the capital, where things were straight up apocalyptic. Yet, within just a couple months, the men returned and took their matches to the Gulf and went on with their lives. Whereas the women kept waiting.
1 second. Did you say Gulf?
I'm Malu. Of course I said Gulf. Push it in. But yes, they went to Dubai and they played their matches and were happy.
Yeah, that's the thing with our sports bodies. No, they're infamous for being nonchalant about sports that aren't men's international cricket. Like, look at the Ranji Trophy. It's a prestige tournament and it is still held in very high regard. But how much coverage do we get compared to the IPL, right? But I don't know if it's a cricket problem or an India-only problem, because Australia, New Zealand, and England have, like you said, their own sports leagues, and they're massively popular. These 3 teams are really great at what they do, from club levels to international tournaments. But, so is the Indian team. We are ranked internationally 4th in both ODI and T20 rankings. The only difference is that these countries have obviously put in much more money in their women's teams than we have. But here's the kicker again. Despite being 7-time world champions, there is still a significant wage gap between the men and women in the Australian teams. The good news, I guess, is that the association did finally take notice and is now increasing the base pay for the women. But if you look at other sports, it's a whole other story. Take tennis, for example. Serena Williams is arguably the greatest tennis player of all time. And this is no disrespect meant to Rafa or Raj, but they've never won their 23rd Grand Slam while pregnant.
Yes.
It deserves.
Yes.
That's the point, right? Women will play while pregnant, they'll play while sick, and then they still don't get equal pay. And when they finally advocated for and won equal pay, this certain player that I really dislike. I'm talking about Novak, but he said that he appreciated the work that women put in, but men deserve to be paid more because they attracted more viewers. And the rest of his statement, how people will say, oh, I'm not racist. I have so-and-so friends. He said, I support women because I have a wife. I've had a female coach. I have played with women. So they're a big part of my life.
Played with women. Wow,
Played
Novak.
with women. Aww.
Yeah,
Womenkind. I'm so thankful.
I know. It infuriated me. I went back to look at what he said because this was like 6 years ago. And I'm still so infuriated by what he said. But it's the same argument that is given to the US women's soccer team also. The men apparently get better ratings. This is despite the fact that women have won 4 World Cup titles, 4 Olympic gold medals, and 8 Gold Cups in the Central American and Caribbean Federation, which is way more than the men because their best performances have been reaching semifinals.
My God.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with basketball. Players in the WNBA and the NCAA, which is the college association, have long complained about the disparity in pay, the kind of treatment they receive. So WNBA players are paid a fraction of their NBA counterparts, same like our cricket team. And opposite to our women's cricket team, they keep playing continuous tournaments because they cannot survive on their league salaries. So once the tournament is done, they then go to Russia or China to play another set of tournaments. And then they come back to play the tournament in the US. And they also pay for their own airfare. Yeah, so the college players also have only been getting better accommodation, equipment, even better food, because the last year they complained on social media, created a ruckus because they were getting literally peanuts compared to the men. And now they have started.
But peanuts were what Ravi Shastri said in 2017, that the highest paid men's category at that time used to get 2 crores. And according to him, that was peanuts.
Yeah, you can see we all care very deeply about the way.
No, I really thought that this segment is going to be about like women's cricket, but it's just become about like wage gap.
The thing is, I cannot be objective about sports, you guys. It's just, it infuriates me so much because people are like, oh, who watches women's sports? I'm like, there are so many people who do. What do you mean? But coming to that point, last March, a paper summarizing 30 years of sports broadcasting found that over 80% of telecasts ignore women's sports entirely, even while they are being played in season. On the other hand, the big 3, that is men's basketball, baseball, and football, are constantly advertised and mentioned even in their off season, which is, again, it's just terrible. Things are looking up because the WNBA saw like a 70% increase in 2020 in viewership, and that has been steadily rising. This year's NCAA final for the women was the most watched finals game in 2 decades with 5.9 million viewers. But there will always be women, will always be people who say, oh, but girls don't play very well. And that, again, just...
But apparently a lot of we had a record viewing in Women's World Cup, no? When India was playing. When in the Women's World Cup, some 105 million viewers tuned in to watch. So hopefully things are looking up slowly. And on that note, we come to the end of our second segment. We'll be back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On This Round is on Me, Gauri meets Minu Margaret, founder and CEO of Bliss Club. They talk about how Minu began to produce pocket-enriched activewear for women. On Big Talk About Tiny Humans, Devi Shobha and Meghna explain how one can prepare their kids for emergencies. This week on the Musafir story, Saif and Faiza speak with Akshata Bhanjdeo, director of Belgaria Palace, an 18th century Victorian-era style palace that is now a boutique hotel in Mayurbhanj, Odisha. And on Audio Gyan, Kedar speaks to Kshitiz Anand about his Happy Horizons Trust and his community-based learning. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you might be listening to us on. And do check us out on YouTube. We're building a whole bunch of different channels. You can find them on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And we're also doing a small listener survey, which we would really appreciate your help with. It helps us kind of talk to advertisers. So you could go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. It'll just take a couple of minutes and it would be really helpful to us. We do appreciate this. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance and the India Water Portal. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network. It's time for our final segment this week, Roast or Toast, and Sara is back to her form.
Yes, I'm finally back home.
Yes.
I missed my cynical abode of least fave items. It's been a while. Anyway, this one's just plain unnecessary and gross. Turns out the latest trend in the food and beverage industry of all places is called poop swoop. Yep.
Yuck.
Thank you. Appropriate reaction. And it is exactly what you would imagine. Turns out restaurants across the world are really embracing serving a poop swoop of everything. Right from chicken liver mousse to chocolate icing to whipped ricotta. They basically made it look like the poop emoji, and it's a raving hit. I mean, for as Gen Z as I'm made to be on this pod, I fail to understand why we have this inherent need to keep creating trends and such ridiculous ones of all things. And the funniest part about this story, though, is that the creator of the piping style simply called it swirlies and is now fairly amused by this transition to shit, quite literally.
Exactly. That's what I thought. I mean, McDonald's has been doing that McSwirl for ages. It's the same thing.
Exactly. I mean, his quote, I think, cracked me up the most. I think we paved the way to allow people to make food that looks like poop emojis and not feel bad about it. He's just like reluctantly embracing it.
I see. So I'm back with Fave. Last Friday afternoon, I was lying horizontal, happily reading the most delightful thing in the Mel magazine, a history of the comb over. What's the comb over? Yes, that despairing effort of men to hide their balding heads, chronicling the likely invention, or maybe not, of the comb over by Julius Caesar to King Charles IX, who sported a comb over not to conceal his hair loss, but to accentuate it. You must check it out. There are images. Then there are pictures of Napoleon sporting a front to back comb over, as opposed to the usual side to. Talking about innovation, there was a strange patent from 1977 granted to a father-son duo who claimed that they invented this new technique involving not just the comb, as in hair over from one side, but from both sides and the back. So it's like a pancake sitting on top, like a folded thing sitting on your head. And there are scientific images to go with it. Obviously,
What?
It's a patent. Yes.
Oh,
Of course.
And there's a lot more. So if you want to have some fun, the link is in the description.
that is so delightful. I can't wait to see the pictures. My fave item for this week is that in 1957, a BBC news program called Panorama pranked its viewers for April Fools with a video report that trees flowering in England, Switzerland, and Italy in springtime were growing spaghetti noodles. The broadcaster Richard Dimbley went into painstaking detail about how each of the noodles each year would grow to the exact same length due to the hard work and the harvesting techniques of these spaghetti farmers. It is so delightful to watch because it's all black and white. It's narrated with the seriousness of a proper newscast. And some viewers even called in to ask where they could procure this spaghetti bush.
Oh,
But
wow.
my favorite bit in this is a line from the BBC archive report, which says, but some viewers fail to see the funny side of the broadcast and criticize the BBC for airing the item on what is supposed to be a serious factual program. So the jokes about Twitter and outrage just write themselves.
I think this was the goal of journalism. Let's go back to these days. This is what we should do.
And that was our show this week. Thank you so much for joining us on Press Decode. You can catch us every Thursday on the IVM Podcasts Network. And guys, please remember, don't let the news give you the blues.
Are you looking for finance products and services that can enhance your personal finance experience? Are you looking for a space to talk about your financial product or service? And are you looking for a crisp talk show where the conversation is all about money? Well, your search ends here. Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta and I'm host of the Paisa Vaisa podcast, and I invite you for the conversation about your personal finance on each Monday on the IVM podcast app or the website or on any podcast streaming platforms. See you folks.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Dugirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders and change makers from across business, media, marketing and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app or wherever you get your podcast from.